Well, my lesson today is going to be a part of a bigger conversation, if you will, that we're having here at the, amongst us, let's say at the Issaquah Church of Christ, but amongst ourselves. And I'm going to be preaching on genuine love, purity, brotherly love, enthusiasm, optimism, perseverance, prayer, generosity, dealing with persecution without bitterness, humility, meekness. Yeah, that's it. And so this being part of a bigger conversation, the elders of our congregation, you know who they are going to be taking what I say and setting it in a broader context that is specific to us today. Which means that of all of these subjects that I'm going to preach on, I'm not probably going to say a whole lot about them. But I have sort of put them in a package and presented them to you as I just did a moment ago. And I want you to understand that all of these things together are conveying a certain message. I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail with regard to them, as you can imagine. But we'll have some things to say about each one of them. So this morning we're going to start out with a thesis as we normally do. Okay, there we go. So the reproduction of the life of Christ in the human heart. Thus has Christianity been defined. In him, God is calling us, or his people, to a positive, determined, purposeful life in this world. Indeed, the strength of this local fellowship as a force for good is dependent upon the people in it. Morality needs a dynamic, or put another way, conduct requires a power behind it. And Paul recognized this fact and found the basis of this motivation in the mercies of God. This chapter, Romans 12, begins with the word therefore. And it points back to the teaching that is presented in Romans 1 through 11. And at the end of Romans 11, the apostle almost runs out of vocabulary. All the depth of the riches of both the wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable are his judgments and unfathomable his ways, as he refers to the teaching revealed to him through the Holy Spirit in in Romans 1 through 11. Now, if we are not familiar with what is taught in Romans 1 through 11, we perhaps cannot relate to why Paul would go off the way he did, with such amazement and profound sense of awe. But the point that I want to make is that this points to what has been taught And it also points to a response on the part of those who understand what he taught in those first 11 chapters. What should our response be to that? Well, what he taught in those 11 chapters was salvation by faith. And you can go to pretty much any university, literary department, and if you ask about those who know about the book of Romans, they will tell you that it's, especially these first 11 chapters, amongst the most profound literature that's ever been produced. It's deep. And certainly shows the grandeur of the heart of the God who revealed it. But what is our response? And this is really what we're going to be talking about for a few minutes here. And I'm watching the clock today. I'm telling you that right now, just right up front. I'm watching the clock because we're going to look at these several attributes or responses to what God has done. And I don't know what I'm going to say yet. And that's why I got to watch the clock. I love it. So let's take a look at what he said here for a moment. And we're going to be looking at this from the standpoint of the transformed life, or we could look at it from the standpoint of Christians at their best. If we're going to present our best, then Paul says that these kinds of things are the appropriate response to what God has done for each of us, so that we actually have a living hope today. Okay, we have a whole bunch of subjects to talk about here. So let's take a look at what he says. Therefore, because of what has been done, here is our response. So there are some things he said at the beginning of the chapter that have to do with sacrifice and how we think about ourselves, and those things are going to be mentioned this. I want to get down here and just look at these responses to what God has done. First of all, that this transformed life, or Christians who are living or giving their best, are living a life of genuine love. He said, let love be without hypocrisy. And that immediately makes me think of what Peter said in 1 Peter 1, where he says there that since you have, in obedience to the truth, purified your souls for a sincere love of the brethren. Now, most of us can easily recognize that hypocrisy and sincerity are opposites. And so sincerity, sincere without wax. And so we all have heard about when people would sell marble statues or things that are made of that kind of material, and if they had faults in them, if they had some kind of blemishes or cracks in them, that people would fill them up with wax to try to disguise the fact that these articles were damaged. But we want our response to what God has done to be a life of genuine love. You know, Jesus, see, this is why this is dangerous. I go all day on one. See? Jesus in John 13 said, a new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. Well, wait a minute. Was that a new commandment, that we love one another? But what he said next is key. He said, even as I have loved you, or just as I have loved you. So it was love your neighbor as yourself. No, Jesus says, I'm going to enhance that and say, love your neighbor as I have loved you. Did he love us sincerely? Was it hypocritical? Was he trying to get something from us and feigning his love. No, it was real. So love one another. And I'm not surprised that this starts out with love one another. It's going to end with love your enemies. And so a life of genuine love. Let love be without hypocrisy. Secondly, a life of purity. And it says, abhor what is evil and cling to what is good. Now, when we talk about purity, we're talking about something that is not mixed with impurities, something that is unalloyed, something that is, it's one thing. And I love the scene in the book of Luke in chapter 10, and Jesus and Lazarus there. And the people that were there in the household, and Mary sitting at the feet of Jesus and listening to him. And Martha, of course, was complaining. And Jesus, remember, he says, Martha, Martha, you're worried and bothered about so many things. But he said only one thing is necessary. And Mary has chosen the good part. And here's the thing about abhorring evil. In that scene, where was the evil? Well, it wasn't there. If you abhor something, you are not concerned about its even existing. As you go about your life and about your business, your only interest would be to destroy it. So Mary was set on the good part, that one thing that her mind was set on, that pure, righteous teaching of the Lord. So abhor what is evil by clinging to what is good. This is a response to what God has done on our behalf. It's a life of brotherly love. Be devoted to one another in brotherly love. Give preference to one another in honor. I remember in the Old Testament a couple of relatives, Abraham and Lot, and they had to, remember the story where they had to divide, they had to go separate ways. But the basis separation, as they were working that out, you remember that Abraham said, let there be no strife between you and me, for we're brothers. This is an affection, a connectedness that is born of a new tie. You know, all of us, or many of us, have siblings. And sometimes we have siblings that are not children of God. And those siblings will be our siblings until one of us dies. I had two brothers. I had a little sister. I hope those two brothers are going to be with God. I know one of them will, because he had Down syndrome. He's with God. He's free. I hope for my other brother. My little sister, I don't have a basis to hope. But the point is that you and I will be brothers and sisters eternally. This will never end. And so loving each other, just with the genuine love, give preference to one another in honor. Hold one another in high esteem. And give preference to one another. Do good to all men, yes, Galatians 6 tells us, but especially to those who are of the household of faith. Especially. We're here for each other. The way. A life of enthusiasm. I love this word, enthusiasm. When you look at the etymology, you see that big word I used there? the history of the breakdown of this word. In the Greek, entheos, and it means possessed or inspired or possessed by a God. And so if a person is enthused, it means they're full of God. And not lagging behind in diligence. Diligence is the key to success. And diligence, busyness, industry, getting after what we're doing, focusing. He says not lagging behind, because you need more diligence. There's a story, true story, about Homer Haley and a preacher, Stan Rodman. I don't know if anybody knows Stan Rodman, but anyway, he was preaching down in Oregon, and Homer was holding a meeting down there. And Stan was supposed to pick him up, and Stan was late. So he finally got there, and he picked Homer up, and they got to the place, and Homer said to the person who told me about this, he says, about Stan, he says, he's not very diligent in his studies, is he? He showed a lack of, being on it and getting it, I'm supposed to be here at this time, I'm there at that time. So Homer was wondering how that attitude might have the rest of his life. So be diligent, Paul told Timothy, to show yourself approved. Be diligent to make sure of his calling and choosing you, Peter said. It's a big part of this transformed life for Christians at their best, a life of optimism. And he refers that to, or connects that to, rejoicing in hope. Hope is desiring and expecting something good. And he says, rejoicing in hope, all of us together, knowing that we have a living hope that will not fade away, reserved in heaven for you who are protected by the power of God through faith. Optimistic. No matter what happens in this life, we can look beyond it. We can transcend it with Jesus, who has overcome the world. How are you in optimism of perseverance? Persevering in tribulation. Tribulation has to do with, I wanted to read this, a state of great trouble or suffering, and it comes without ourselves, from outside. Distress is extreme. Anxiety, sorrow, or pain is what we feel within. I've always been impressed with Romans 2 that tells us that there will be tribulation and distress for every man who does evil, to the Jew first and also to the Greek, for there is no partiality with God. Living a faithless life, not responding to what God has done in the appropriate way as described in these kinds of passages. Distress, we can persevere, we can have patience, we can put one foot in front of the other and live a day at a time, even in the midst of tribulation. And these Christians, in the day that this was written, they knew about tribulation. In a life of prayer, devoted to prayer. Prayer is thanksgiving, confession, adoration, praise, asking, supplication. And if I only have time to say one thing about prayer, what I always tell people when I talk about prayer is that I know the people in your life that you're the closest to. Say, how can you possibly know that? I know them. I know who they are. I don't know their names necessarily, but I do know that they are the people that you talk to the most. The people with whom you share your heart the most. So it is in prayer, if we want to get to know God, then we have to talk to him a lot. Like every day. Like it's never a moment away in our minds. Everything. Experience, he's there. And we can speak to him and acknowledge him as we go through our life. And we can take time in the closet, him and you alone, to talk to him about anything. What is 7 days without prayer makes 1 week. So we have to pray and talk to God. In a life of generosity, contributing to the needs of the saints. When we have opportunities to help someone in the Philippines, a fellow brother or sister or family, if we're able to help, we do. I know someone has contributed to my needs in a way that is above all. I need forgiveness. I need grace. I need hope. That's been made possible for me. So it's a life of generosity, looking for opportunities to give. And hospitality just means you have an open door. Especially for fellow Christians. And then a life without, this is tough. This can be really tough. Bless those who persecute you. And what that means is you be open to any opportunity to do good to those who persecute you. That's not natural, is it? It's not natural. And do not curse. Pray for. Opportunity to do good for. I mean, we're told to love our enemies in Matthew chapter 5. And so if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him a drink. It's also a life of sympathy, of putting ourselves in the place of others. Whether it is when they are rejoicing and we can rejoice together, or when it is a time to weep. We weep together. Now, which one of these do you think is the easiest by comparison, to rejoice with those who rejoice or to weep with those who weep? This is painful for me to even tell this story, but you know, when I was in high school, I played football, and there was a guy on the football team who went to the UW, and he played pro football. And man, that was hard to rejoice with him. I was jealous. You know, some wrong choices away, and it just didn't work out for me. Man, that just hurt. You know, I mean, he's my friend, and you know, he's playing football, and he's on television, and I see him on the sidelines, and you know, I'm like, You know, and so what I'm saying, I mean, it's painful still to think about that. But what I'm saying is that that's harder because that envy can creep in. I wish that had happened to me. How come I didn't catch a break like that? What makes her deserve that? It's hard. But we always have to remember what happened in Romans 1 through 11 for us. You know, what would have happened to me had the Lord allowed me to do that? Where would I be now? I don't know. But I'm glad I'm here. A life of humility. Be of the same mind toward one another. Humility is not thinking less about yourself. I'm just a worm. That's not really humility. Unless it's false. But humility is thinking about yourself less. Okay? So be of the same mind toward one another. You and I are equals. Do not be haughty in mind. Don't be arrogant, puffed up, but associate with the lowly. Do not let there be people in this assembly or anywhere that you think you're better than and you cannot associate with because they're below your station in life. Do not be wise in your own estimation. We know what happens when we do that. Humility. Then a life of meekness. At the end of the chapter, he says, never pay back evil for evil to anyone. Right? As far as it depends on you, be at peace with all men. Never take your own revenge, beloved. For the vengeance of God, for vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. But there's that passage, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him a drink. For by so doing, you'll pour heaping coals upon his head. How must a person feel that treats a humble person badly? And they don't retaliate. They don't cuss him out. They don't take vengeance. James, he talks about that situation, and the righteous man, he does not resist you. The world thinks you're weak, stupid, but the Lord exalts you. So don't be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. So, in 1 Peter 1 or 2 Peter 1, as I close, you remember the Christian graces. For this reason, in your faith supply moral excellence, in your moral excellence, knowledge, in your knowledge, self-control, in your self-control, perseverance, godliness, your godliness, brotherly kindness, in your brotherly kindness, love. But the point is, he says, if these qualities are yours and are increasing, they render you neither useless nor unfruitful in the true knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ. So may we apply that principle here. Respond to God's deep love for you as in arranging for us to be saved by grace through faith. And look at these attributes and determine that they will increase in your life because of the deep gratitude that we have toward God in what he has done on our behalf. Anyone that is within the sound of my voice, it is our prayer that something may have been said to help you come to and serve God. And congregation, let us take these things very seriously, like the gratitude that God deserves from us. Thank you.
$4.79. I know that my Redeemer lives. I know